Thank you everyone for having me as a guest. I try to keep everything like very simple and very realistic so everyone can understand and knows how to apply it if they feel that they need it in their life. It's not like an easy message. It's not like a quick cure or quick fix, but it is important to see a lot of mental and physical health challenges in this perspective on this simple etiology tree I'm going to present for you guys. And again, I'm more than happy to email you the small graphic as well. It's very easy to understand if you're interested in it. And honestly, no matter how good you take care of yourself, you're always going to run into at least one big health challenge in your life. And it's kind of important to, in my opinion, and from my observation, kind of stay away from the myriad of symptom management strategies in the healthcare field, present throughout the healthcare field these days, not only in the medical sciences, but in the medical community, but also in the health and fitness community and then the holistic community as well. It's kind of very easy to fall into these symptom management traps. And they do at times provide short-term relief or like false hope of sorts, but they never really, once again, for the most part, they never address the person that's leading to certain behaviors, then that's leading to certain issues. And I feel it's always important to basically change the person that's causing all of the person's mental and physical health challenges. Of course, there are no absolutes. There are things like car accidents and stuff of that sort. So you got to put it into proper context. But the bulk majority of health challenges people are facing these days are not due to genetics, are not due to car accidents. They're just due to poor behavior patterns over a very long time, 10, 20, 30 years that accumulate and probably hit most people like in their mid 30s or mid 40s, et cetera, et cetera. And then if they get stuck, which I see a lot of people doing, if they get stuck in these symptom management strategies of healthcare, they kind of, if anything, get rid of one problem like high blood pressure, for example, but they never, with high blood pressure medication, but they never change the belief system that led to the high blood pressure. And unfortunately, if you don't do that, that same belief system that led to the high blood pressure or health issue ABC, whatever it may be, will lead to a myriad of other issues throughout the person's life. And their only strategy at that point, if they're into the game of chasing one symptom after another, is just to be basically, for the most part, for most people, on more and more medical drugs, which in and of itself cause a myriad of side effects for a lot of people, which require more medical drugs, which require more side effects. And this is, of course, great money for a lot of people, of course, but I just feel it's just not fair for the patient that's oftentimes like a busy individual, like a lot of you guys, and they don't have the time to, read 4 or 5 books a month on a given health subject or take a lot of courses, et cetera, because they're busy with their work and their occupation and specialty and their family, et cetera. And they sometimes get funneled into these kind of symptom management strategies unknowingly, thinking it's the best option. But there are many other great options out there, and they might not be as easy as taking medical drugs or doing some other kind of symptom management approach. But if a person is looking to resolve a health issue, they would definitely need to get to the etiology of that health issue. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, that etiology tree. So for anyone that runs into problems and they need a clear guide or a clear blue map, at least you'll have that at the end of this call. Once again, it's not easy. Real change takes real change, obviously. So it's not an easy approach. But before I begin, I do want to list some general stats, health stats as they apply to the US, because it's important to recognize there's a problem and the approach to solving that problem isn't working in order for people to start recognizing that a new approach, a more productive approach is needed. So just some general stats right now, 9 out of 10, not exaggerating at all, American adults are metabolically not well. They're metabolically very sick. So that's 90% of the population right there. And it's going to be very startling once I list the last statistic, and I'll explain why in terms of the total economy for the nation. So you're looking at 9 out of 10 American adults right now are metabolically not well. You have about 800,000 Americans dying just from heart attacks every single year. 800,000. You have about 1 in 2, so 50% of people developing cancer within their lifetime. So you can imagine, we're on the weekend, if you go out with, let's say it's you and 3 friends, two of you will get cancer and one of you will die from that cancer, and then one of you will die from a heart attack. So basically 50% of your friends are either going to die from some type of cancer or a heart attack, which is pretty startling. And the bulk majority of those cases, I would say at least 95+%, could be easily avoidable through minor lifestyle changes and some certain belief system changes that made it acceptable for the person to, live out those lifestyle habits, et cetera, et cetera. So basically from cancer alone, you have about 650,000 Americans dying every single year. Then you have about 105,000 Americans dying from type 2 diabetes every single year. And depending on, how you count the stats, there's a lot of, politics around it and stuff of that sort. I'm not here to discuss that. But the last time I checked, close to 1 million Americans died from the COVID virus, but 850,000 of those million deaths came from people that were very metabolically sick. So like I mentioned that stat, they're metabolically sick already. So they're, like extremely overweight, and they have like various other health issues going on already that are most always, I would say 99% of the time, due just to poor lifestyle and nutritional habits carried on through, of course, long periods of time. Nothing happens overnight here. So that's basically like 850,000 possible avoidable deaths that we could have experienced, and maybe even not even having to shut down the economy, the entire nation as well. So then you also have 125,000 Americans dying from strokes every year. Once again, pretty preventable as well. And then 125 to 135,000 Americans dying every year from properly prescribed medical drugs, from the side effects of those drugs. So that's quite a bit of people right there already. And if you count the total health cost and expenditure of the U.S., it basically comes down to about $12,000 to $15,000 of medical expenses per year per person in the U.S. And once again, the country is the sickest basically it's ever been, with 9 out of 10 Americans metabolically unhealthy now. And what's the number one reason for bankruptcy in the U.S. right now? Accounting for 65% of all personal bankruptcies in the U.S. is just health issues. So if you count, 9 out of 10 Americans right now are metabolically not well, and 65% of all personal bankruptcies are coming because of health issues, you can see that it's pretty startling what's going to happen if this trend continues in the next like 20, 30, 40 years in terms of the economy of the country as a whole, and just obviously the individual person suffering from the health issue. And then if they have to go through a financial crisis, that makes that recovery even that much more stressful and difficult. Like, for example, I interviewed one person recently that did develop cancer. He had a great insurance plan, and that covered like 2 million, had total coverage of about $2 million or so. And his battle with cancer maxed out that insurance plan, and then he was still stuck with like $1 million bill even after all of that, which definitely floored him. I'm not going to talk about it extensively here in terms of his story, but I have the full interview online if you guys are interested in hearing it. So there is kind of like a health crisis. I don't want to seem like, but just kind of looking at the facts here, there's a health crisis. And I believe one of the reasons, in my opinion, we've run into this health crisis, not just because of the healthcare system, it's also because of the values and core values and belief systems of the individual, as well in the family unit. But the healthcare system is very heavily reliant on symptom management. So once again, they're in the mindset of, in simple terms, you have a rock stuck inside of your shoe. You could imagine like we're walking outside at a park and you get a rock stuck inside your shoe. Everyone has had this happen. And if I was your friend and you had that rock stuck inside your shoe and it's causing you pain, how would you feel and react if I told you like, hey, don't take that rock out, just here, take these painkillers instead, and you won't feel the pain of the rock? That would sound like pretty stupid for the most part for most people, but that's exactly how symptom management healthcare works for the most part. So instead of taking the rock out and walking pain-free and then maybe learning, how to tie your shoes a little bit properly, or maybe get a little bit of a higher boot so the rock doesn't get stuck in there so easily or fall in there so easily, or maybe don't even walk on gravel or something like that. They're just all about like, you know what, keep the rock there and just take painkillers instead, and everything will be fine, which is fairly silly. And then once again, no absolutes, but generally speaking, that is how the healthcare system works. So what I'm trying to propose here is for people that aren't interested in pursuing that, but are more interested in going on like a very honest health journey to get to the, once again, the etiology of their health issue and solve it from the root up. That's what I'm proposing here. It's, once again, not an easy journey. It requires a lot of huge changes in your life, including most likely changes in your friends, family, various internal belief systems as well, et cetera, et cetera. So how I'm going to present it is I'm going to present it from an excess fat gain perspective, because most people could relate to not, having a little bit of excess body fat that they don't want, at least at one point of their life, or maybe a large point of their life as well. But just understand that pretty much any health issue can be approached in this manner. Okay, so don't kind of limit it just to excess fat gain. So let's look at the simple topic, an easy and straightforward topic of excess body fat. So a lot of times it's like, okay, so I have 20 pounds of excess body weight. Okay, cool. So here's how I try to look at it personally. So 20 pounds of excess body weight, I would have to first accurately start seeing excess fat gain as a symptom, right? It's not like a standalone cause, and it should definitely not be approached as a standalone cause. And it's like a symptom of typically what? Like poor lifestyle and nutritional habits over long periods of time. It doesn't happen overnight. The average person gains about like 5 pounds of excess body fat per year, which is pretty invisible from month to month, and you don't really notice it because you constantly are seeing yourself daily. So you habituate to your new appearance, So if you put on like 3 extra pounds in a year, you wouldn't even really visually see that. And also typically people then buy slightly larger clothing slowly, which makes it seem, to the mind's eye that the body is still of the same dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not much. It doesn't happen overnight, but typically it happens with, typically decades of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. And it's important to tackle the problem through those variables, but it doesn't end there, okay? But I do want to explain what those variables are, because they're extremely important, because a lot of people just lack the understanding of these fundamentals as well. So if you have excess body fat, for example, and you approach it from the obvious strategy of like, hey, you just got to like work out more and eat a little bit better, it seems like that's all there is to the problem, but it's not. Although those two variables are important, I'll explain what entails in those two variables, so at least the mastery can be attained there. So for example, what I found with clients is it's very important to educate them on what real food is, because there's a lot of misconception here on what real food is, because most people have been, for the most part, really detached from like the farming lifestyle or wilderness lifestyle, and it's hard to decipher like what real food is and what real food isn't. So for example, you would, cover various topics of like, this is whole food, it's important to stay away from cereals, all these things you guys spoken about. I'm not going to touch them into details here, but they are important to understand. So for example, I'm just going to give you guys some quick action steps here. Some great companies to source like high quality, legitimate grass-fed beef and other pasture-raised animals from are like americangrassfed.org. You can scroll to the bottom of the website. They have an interactive website, interactive map. You just click on that. You don't even have to click on your state. A lot of them do shipping interstate as well. So you can pick any ranch there. There are hundreds, and they're legitimate grass-fed operations, because you guys have to remember that, the digestive system, in particular, the microbiome, has spent a long time evolving to eat real food. The Homo sapien, kind of like us, basically has been around for like 200,000 plus years. And it's taking a lot of years for the digestive system to evolve to be able to break down proper whole food. And 90% of the food that people are eating today are very far detached from what natural food is even like. So for example, a common misconception is like buying cage-free eggs, or products that say vegetarian fed on poultry, for example. I'm sure you guys have seen that many times. But the thing is, it's like that's not even natural meat, although to the general consumer, they would think like, oh, vegetarian fed, that's good. But if you knew kind of poultry, they're omnivores, So chicken, for example, omnivores, they prefer to eat bugs, insects, all that stuff, roam outside 24/7. But when you see vegetarian fed, it really means just heavily grain fed. And if it's not organic, it's definitely fed a tremendous amount of genetically modified corn and soy, which is obviously grown with a tremendous amount of synthetic biocides, which a lot of people, once again, presume there's safety testing done in the US. That presumption is definitely wrong, because there is no safety testing done in the US for complete formulations of pesticides. So that's what the general consumer would think would happen. They would take a complete product, spray it on a crop, and then see if a living organism dies. And remember, all of these pesticides are meant to kill living organisms. That's the whole purpose of a biocide. Last time I checked, a lot of humans are living organisms too, so kind of connect the dots there. And the average American right now consumes around like 1.5 liters of glyphosate per day cumulatively throughout their diet, which is very disruptive to the gut microbiome, and a very dangerous active ingredient in the synthetic herbicide product Roundup. So what the testing really entails is they take typically in a complete formulation, there's an active ingredient and an inactive ingredient. And what the testing requires is just for the facilities to test the inactive ingredient on its own in isolation without the inactive ingredients present. But here's the trick. The inactive ingredients are put there for a reason, and they're put there for a reason to basically make the chemical formulation more potent and longer lasting in the environment. So of course, if you take them out, you're going to, the product isn't going to be as potent, isn't going to look as dangerous on paper. But remember, the farmer isn't using the active ingredient in isolation. They're using the complete formulation. And you can't wash this stuff off, unlike fruit and vegetables either. It's designed to be soaked up by the root of the plant and made into the nutritional profile of the crop. And remember, when it's vegetarian fed, the animals are fed these crops as well, and they bioaccumulate into the animal's fat tissue, organ tissue, and to a smaller extent muscle tissue, and then you end up eating it. And remember, just however toxic the animal is the more toxicity you're going to form as well. And the more toxic you are, especially the more toxicity your visceral tissue builds up, just naturally your body's going to want to defend against that, because it's very important. Like you can live without your right arm, but you can't live without your liver, for example. So if you start building up a lot of toxicity in your liver, one natural defense mechanism the body does is simply start storing more body fat, presuming there's also a caloric surplus present as well. And it allocates these toxins away from the liver into these fat stores as well. So then it accumulates there, and then they sit there and brew. And the average newborn born in a metropolitan area in America these days is born with trace amounts of 200 different synthetic chemicals in their bloodstream already. And that's just how the kids of the nation are starting their life. So the toxic load of the average individual is pretty high as well, which I'm sure is one of the contributing factors to the high cancer rates and other issues as well, which could range from aesthetic too, like skin issues also are very, very common. So it's important to educate the client on what actual real food is, so they have like a good reference point of what they need to select. And obviously there's so much more to this topic. I can cover just simply like 4 or 5 hour conversation on here, but just from that short conversation, it kind of gives you the discrepancy and of, a lot of times when people purchase even what they presume is healthy food, whole food at the store, something as innocent as chicken, might not be the best choice for that person. It's the same thing across the board for beef products, vegetable crops, whatever, grains as well. If you're not careful and don't at least buy USDA organic certified products, you do risk the chance of increasing your toxic load by quite a bit, being exposed to a lot of beta agonists, steroids, antibiotics, which are very present in the food supply industry. And then obviously, when you're eating out, oftentimes, even if you try to pick the healthier option, they're oftentimes really cooked in a lot of industrial seed oils, which are extremely inflammatory. also grown with a lot of these, they're made from these crops grown with a lot of these chemicals. And you can kind of see how it gets a little bit complicated for the average consumer, which all this time thought they were making the best decisions, but also wondering why they're facing health challenges. So some great websites for you guys you can check out if you're very picky on that. You could shop at the grocery store, but I would just recommend shopping with labels that say USDA organic. It's not the absolute end-all standard. It's not perfect, but it's an amazing step in the right direction compared to what most people are doing right now anyways. If you want to go a step above and beyond, you can check out websites called americangrassfed.org. You can scroll to the bottom of the website. Once again, there's an interactive map. Order your meats from there. There's a website called eatwild.com, which is a great resource as well. Farm Fresh to You is a pretty good company that delivers local organically grown crops to your door like once a week. It's like a subscription type service. Buying wild fish at the grocery store is amazing as well. You can check out websites called like vitalchoice.com. They fish in like very remote areas, so you don't get a lot of that toxic buildup, which is present in a lot of fish in the ocean these days, unfortunately. So websites like Force of Nature, I forgot their exact website, but Force of Nature Meats, you can Google them, and you could actually order wild game from there, which is kind of what I generally do. I transitioned to a wild game diet. So I eat like elk twice a week, wild boar twice a week, deer twice a week. And then I either have 100% grass-fed beef, bison, or wild fish as well. So that's kind of generally my protein source looks like throughout the week. And I generally tend to drink water out of a Berkey filter system, which is another thing, like never drink water out of tap these days. So I'm going to conclude it there for the food, simply because, once again, there's so much to go over today, and there's a lot to go over in any one of these topics, but it's always important to educate a client on these topics. Another big one is a misconception of sleep. So you want to be sleeping between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. typically, because your body repairs itself from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. physically, and from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. mentally. And that's easy to understand intellectually. A lot of people would be like, oh, I get it, you know. And a lot of these health topics, ironically, are easy to understand intellectually. But remember, we're not trying to be academic professors here. It's all about applying it in a world or in a society that doesn't necessarily facilitate health conscious choices that well, you know. So that's the real challenge, kind of doing the things I'm going to be talking about today in the real world all the time, 7 days a week, pretty much close to all year round, which is what really needs to be done if you really want to optimize your mental and physical health and be the best looking and feeling version of yourself. So a lot of times when I say like, oh, you know, sleep between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. to a person, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of do that. But then you look at their sleeping logs and they may be actually going to sleep, let's say best case scenario at 10 p.m., but they're on their phone. You know, they're really actually falling asleep at like 11 p.m. And if you average out throughout the week, that person right there just lost 7 hours of physical repair time. And then they wonder, you know, like, why am I feeling so physically drained? Why does this like nagging shoulder never recover? Remember, your body recovers physically from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Why do I need like, you know, 10 cups of coffee just to get by throughout the day, and I still, you know, feel tired anyways? Of course, there are a myriad of reasons for this, but just giving a brief overview. Another very important topic, especially in Western cultures, which tends to be like very, very fast paced, okay? Especially information overload is super crazy these days. So for example, 100 years ago, the amount of information that a person was exposed to in their entire lifetime equaled the amount of information that the average American is exposed to in one day now. So obviously, you know, with that much information coming in, with that much constant activity, the central nervous system doesn't know how to handle that. Just remember, like less than 10,000 years ago, we were all running around as hunter-gatherers in the forest, kind of basically what you would do for the most part on vacation now. That's just how people lived 24/7 then as a default. And the central nervous system, there's a great book on this called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. He's a great stress physiology researcher from Stanford. Of course, many other very credible people have shined light on this topic. And the central nervous system has ideally evolved to deal with peak stresses. So you go hunt, it's obviously pretty stressful. Maybe one of your tribes people die, and that's pretty stressful. But then guess what? Like a few months go by and there's nothing going on. And typically in tribal societies, it's like you go hunt in the morning, and then you just hang out all day. You're not like, working crazy hours, getting stuck in traffic, et cetera, et cetera. And then, a few months go by. Once again, there's a peak followed by nothing. Unfortunately, these days, you have a lot of chronic micro stresses, getting stuck in traffic, for example, this bill, that bill. I got to check my phone every 2 minutes, whatever, family issues, this issue, this, everyone is different, of course. And then also you have those chronic micro stresses combined with a fairly frequent macro stresses as well, deadlines, stuff of that sort. So central nervous system management is also important to educate the client on, because oftentimes, once again, the biology isn't keeping up kind of with the demands of modern day living. And the stats I listed in the beginning is just like objective proof of that, people tend to be kind of like falling apart, et cetera, et cetera. So central nervous system management is huge. Teaching people how to use movement as medicine. A lot of times, I would say people are doing more harm than good in the gym, meaning like they sit a lot in linear patterns all day. Even if they have a standing desk, it's very linear. And then they go in the gym and they perform linear movements again. So like the bench press, the pull, like everything's very like sagittal plane dominant. And of course, this develops a lot of imbalances and also develops a lot of poor engrams, and oftentimes reinforces poor posture as well. So like a typical white collar worker would have like a very pronounced upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome as well. And what that means is the upper cross syndrome is the stereotypical one, shoulders slouched forward, head protruding forward. And then the lower cross syndrome is when it's kind of like almost like a Donald Duck type shape to their lower back, where it's like very excessive curvature and also kind of like a protruding butt as well. And obviously this is going to cost, in a long enough time frame, cause a lot of chronic physical pain in a person's body, which will add to the demand of their central nervous system. Also, when you do have physical chronic pain, it's very draining on your energy as well. So then typically, instead of addressing that, they get more coffee or something of that sort, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to get people to understand that, hey, the human body has evolved to have dynamic movement all day. So no one position is perfect, which is tough. I used to give a lot of corporate lectures, and it's tough because a lot of times you do need to get it in the zone and really hyper focus to get stuff done. And it's just how it is. But if you guys can, try to include a lot of dynamic movement in your day. So have one typical scenario. Everyone is different, of course, so take this into consideration. One typical scenario is like stand up at a standing desk for 2 hours, then sit down for 2 hours, then go for like a 15-minute walk at lunch, then repeat that for the second half of the day, and you're pretty much, for the most part, done if you kind of could do that layout. And it's not too tough, in my opinion. It's doable. It's not perfect by any means, but it's definitely way better than just standing static all day or sitting static all day, staring in front of the computer. So that's huge. That's a whole huge topic in and of its own. Once again, I'm just summarizing these. And then also another important topic to cover with clients is reducing, once again, their toxic load. Teaching them like, hey, it's not a good idea to drink out of plastic cups, especially if the liquid is heated, like in coffee, for example. It's not a good idea to microwave or heat up your food in plastic containers. So always opt for glass. Try to drink filtered water all the time. Berkey water filter is great. 5-stage reverse osmosis filter is definitely going to eliminate everything. Those options are great, and kind of teaching them on like, hey, the average person's toxic load is really high. This is really increasing your chances of all sorts of disease in your life, all sorts of skin issues as well, possibly leading to excess body fat gain, also definitely disrupting your hormones, which will definitely have a negative impact on your appearance and how your body functions, and also your the ability to lose fat, et cetera, et cetera. So those topics are important to cover. And oftentimes also, especially in holistic circles and fitness circles, that's where it stops, and that kind of makes sense on the surface. It seems like that's all you really have to do, which is like, hey, of course, if I have excess body fat issues, then it seems like on the surface, all I really have to do is work out more, eat better, and do a lot of this lifestyle stuff, and everything will pan out. And definitely doing a lot of those lifestyle things will improve your chances of creating lasting change. And this is what it's all about, especially with fat loss programs. The only fat loss program that ever works is one where you don't have to do another fat loss program again. And what I mean by that is you might have to, lose a pound here or there, but it's not like you have to go and lose another 40 pounds again, And you see this a lot with fat loss programs, especially. People lose their weight, they lose their 20, 30, 40 pounds. And according to general statistics, about 90% of them regain all their weight within a 2 to 3 year period, which in my opinion, it's like, it's kind of almost not worth doing to begin with in that case, because it's also just very unhealthy to lose a lot of weight, gain a lot of weight, lose a lot of weight. It's very, very tough on the heart as well. And also aesthetically, it could be tough on your skin elasticity also. So you can get like a bit more sagging skin, which obviously hurts a person's self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also, those things are great once again, and it goes far above and beyond already what you would get at your typical medical doctor's office, which is like, hey, maybe take this appetite suppressor, and I'm not going to basically see you any follow-up or anything for 4 or 5 months, and then good luck. You know what I mean? So it's a huge upgrade, but there are always various levels of integrity, right, with anything. So you have to ask yourself, you have excess fat gain. It's a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. But why would a person participate in that kind of self-destructive behavior? And it comes down to really a belief system that doesn't facilitate health-conscious choices, obviously. Sometimes it's under the radar too. The person is unknowingly doing that. It's like, for example, I mentioned with the food example. Sometimes people are shopping for food that they really do believe is healthy, but they just don't have the education or the reference point of what healthy food really is. And there are also situations where a person knows they're doing unhealthy patterns to themselves. They don't want to, but they continue to do it. That's another situation, which brings up the importance of individuality. You have to remember, like, nature is a novelty generator. There are no two grains of sand on the planet that are exactly the same. And it's the same with people. Even twins are completely different, okay? So even if you have two participants, let's say both are males, both the same age, both the same ethnicity, they even have both the same exact degrees, they even graduated from the same school, have the same exact group of friends. But the reason why one person gained 20 pounds and the reason why subject B gained 20 pounds could be completely different. So their strategies need to be completely different, which goes into why it's important to really understand the person's story as well. And I feel that's what's missing in healthcare today, 100%. No one listens to your story. No one really sits down with you and talks to you, where a proper assessment, you can look at master practitioners of health and wellness like Dr. Stuart McGill, Paul Chek is another great example. There are many others. Dude, their assessments, like, bare minimum lasts like 3 hours. Today, what you're going to get at your doctor's office is a bare minimum of 3 minutes if you're lucky. Same exact thing. I'm not putting doctors down at all. It's the same exact thing in the fitness community. Oftentimes you show up, they do a quick Q&A, they have you sign a waiver, and then boom, you're in a class with like 20 people with no addressing even those top 2 issues that I mentioned. But going back over here, like, a belief system obviously leads to poor lifestyle and poor nutritional choices, which over a long enough time frame lead to excessive fat gain. But then you have to go like, okay, so what's leading to a poor belief system that doesn't facilitate a person's health, which is basically their mental and physical health is, like, literally, although it doesn't seem like it in a lot of people's eyes, it's literally the most important thing in your life, because without that, you lose everything. And in fact, if that isn't optimized, I don't really care how well you're doing in all other aspects of your life. Your quality of life will still be pretty low. Basically, the ceiling will be set by how mentally and physically healthy you are. So let's say even if you're very sought after in your field, you're making great money, you're living in a great place. I mean, you're a great provider to your family and just a great community leader. That stuff is all A plus, of course. But if your health is like C minus, your life quality is actually at a C minus. So it's important to kind of take it seriously, because a lot of people these days are they say it's very important, but then their actions say different, obviously. And actions are where the results come from, right? Okay, so it comes down to like uh, a love-hate relationship, which is pretty common in a lot of people these days. So these could happen um, in various aspects of life. So a personal life love-hate relationship, a very typical one is like, I've been married to this person for 10 years, and maybe I did love this person initially a lot, but we've gone our separate ways. But for one reason or another, the person doesn't feel like safe to end the relationship. It could be because of social pressures, financial pressures, whatever. And inevitably, what happens is the person ends up feeling like they've kind of like lost control, and they don't have control over the situation. And they typically, in this situation, um, would lead to using food to cope with that micro stress. Like I mentioned, having a love-hate relationship and dealing with that a lot is providing that micro stress, sometimes a macro stress on the central nervous system, which the central nervous system isn't that good at dealing with. So they typically would seek out food, for example, in extreme situations, obviously like medical drugs or street drugs as well. But food is great because it provides them the power and love and acceptance that they're looking for, that they're no longer getting in that relationship. So for example, they can pick the food up and eat it whenever they want it. The food gives you pleasure. It accepts you for who you are, which is at the end of the day, anyone really wants is just to be accepted for who they are. And then they have the power to put the food down, which once again, they don't have the power to step away from that relationship or work situation or whatever. Another common thing is also like a story gap. So this can take on a myriad of variables, but let's say a person genuinely wants to be like an artist, for example, but they don't feel safe expressing that genuine desire. They're like, well, I'm not good enough or whatever, and the world isn't going to accept me for who I am, aka I'm not going to be able to make a living off of that. So I'm going to become a warehouse manager or something like mainstream. And it might be okay for a few years, but deep down inside, this person knows that, hey, there's a story gap and disconnect between what I want to be doing and what I don't want to be doing. And that once again provides those micro stresses. And in order to deal with that over prolonged periods of time, the person has to adapt maladaptive behavior. They have to. And in this case, in this scenario, that maladaptive behavior is once again seeking out food. Yeah, because it gives them the power. The food accepts them for who they are. It loves them for who they are. It gives them pleasure. And then once again, they can put that food away whenever they want, which they feel they don't have that power in their career choice in that example. Another thing is also spaciousness in the sense that's labeled as emptiness. So you typically, in this scenario, you typically see it might actually be a very successful individual, but they hit 45 or 50 and they find out the ladder was leaned against the wrong building and they've been climbing in the wrong direction, basically. And that would also lead to those micro stresses, etc., which will lead to maladaptive behavior, which will lead to poor lifestyle and nutritional choice, and once again lead to fat gain. But once again, it would lead to any health issue, not just fat gain here. And then the fourth variable is basically surroundings. The person's surroundings are very important. So even if a person were to accomplish, let's say in an extreme situation, were to actually successfully finish a drug rehab program, it would obviously be massively detrimental. And you don't need to be a PhD in psychology to realize if this person goes to the same environment they're in when the drugs began, their problems are going to return. The drug dealer is there, their druggie friends are there. They probably don't have a job, which would make them more inclined to go back to that kind of lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. Then obviously that would lead them up that path. So it's important that not only the internal environment, probably also the external environment changes if lasting change is needed, from my observation. So then you would ask, like, why do people, we've got to go a little bit deeper. It doesn't end there, but we're almost there. So then you got to ask, like, why do people get into love-hate relationships? Why do they have this story gap? Why do they have, a sense of emptiness, et cetera, et cetera? And it comes down to really like a disconnect in core values and sometimes lack of clarity of what those core values even are. And I've seen this as like a very common problem, even coaching a lot of 40, 45-year-olds. Like I have them do a lot of training with identifying like what their core values are. And a lot of times the only way to really know who you are is to know who you aren't first. So you have to spend a lot of time of your life doing stuff you don't want to do, but inevitably also coach the person into identifying that they don't want to be doing that and thanking that situation. So for example, if a relationship didn't work out, thanking that relationship for showing them what they don't want in their next relationship, or whatever, in their next path of anything. And inevitably, the closer, the more narrow that disconnect is from the core values, the less maladaptive behavior has to form, because all of a sudden the person is living a day-to-day existence that's congruent with what they want, So one exercise I have clients do, for example, is spend a few weeks writing out their core values, like I like this type of music, I like this type of environment, this type of environment, this type of person to hang out with, and seeing how close their weekly schedule really aligns with those core values. And once again, the wider the gap and the longer the time frame that gap exists, the more maladaptive behavior will have to form. And once again, you keep running into these loops of belief systems, then running into poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to try to wrap this up here. And then one level deeper, and this gets into Stefan Wolinski's work, which is an amazing resource, especially I found for people that have done 10, 15, 20 years of psychotherapy or something of that sort, and are still kind of the same, like working on their stuff. Nothing has seemed to change. I think his work, it's not for everyone. It's great, and I do use it with a lot of my clients as well. But basically, where does the disconnect in core values arise from? It arises obviously and can be tied back to your personality. I'm going to be using a lot of his work here, but not using a lot of his phrases simply because I just don't want it to be confusing. But in short, going back to your central nervous system, what is the purpose of the central nervous system? Literally, its only purpose is to get you to survive in this world. And the central nervous system, for the listener, is just like your brain and your spinal cord, basically, okay? Is just to get you to survive in this world. And that's it. And it does this a couple of different ways, and it really has no other purpose. And in fact, if you guys really meditate on a lot of your activities and a lot of your motivations, you'll basically trace it back to just survival. So like, I got to get a college degree so I can get a job, so I can get a better paycheck, so I can survive better. I got to get be friends with these people so I can have like a tribe, so I could network better, so I could survive better. Even a lot of spirituality paths, if you look at the paths, it's like, I got to get into spirituality so I become more enlightened, so I can cope with society better, so I could survive better. It always goes back to just survival, and that's it. That's its only purpose. And it does this through a couple of ways. One way is it just organizes a chaotic environment, for example, enough like with you guys for your crowd, like, and I got this example from Donald Hoffman, who's the creator of interface theory, one of my professors from University of California, Irvine. One of the ways is basically through dumbing down the environment quite a bit. So you look at a word icon on your desktop, but obviously, as you guys know, the word software doesn't look like anything like that front end development, the user-friendly side. It's just like a bunch of code and numbers that I don't even understand, or HTML, or whatever it's called. That's actually how the software looks. And if your central nervous system wasn't around, the universe, like this pencil I'm holding here, would be incomprehensible. It would be like billions of atoms that are not even organized. So through abstraction, the central nervous system dumbs things down so the user, like me, can interact with this and write stuff. And then once again, I could write stuff, make a living, and survive better, et cetera, et cetera. Another way the central nervous system gets you to survive better is by creating your personality. It does this for you. It's not even done by you, and then you kind of carry it on your own throughout life. But it does this basically between the ages of 5 and 12 months. Before that, the child, if you look at them, they're like in a state of essence. they think they're actually one with the universe. And like the child and the mother are just one being, for example. They don't see any separation or detachment. But then at 5 to 12 months, the personality begins to form. And the central nervous system, there are basically 9 distinct personality types, but everyone is basically a degree of these, kind of gives you a personality. And part of that personality is it establishes like your greatest fear. And every personality has like a greatest fear. I'm just going to use one example. So let's say one example is like you're a type 2 personality type. So it would be like their greatest fear is I am worthless. So obviously that's a great fear, and that feels shitty, presuming you actually believe you are worthless. So what this personality type does their whole entire life to once again increase their survival is they try to prove that they aren't worthless. So they spend their whole entire life trying to show worth, getting degrees, whatever. Typically, it's also reflective of society too. So if they're in academic circles, they'll try to get degrees and move up the academic ladder. If they're in spiritual circles, they'll try to really prove worth by meditating more, being more understanding of the spiritual practices, whatever, something to distinguishes them as worthy. But the problem is the central nervous system has done this for you, and it's a false conclusion. And you can't come up with the right answer from a false conclusion. So the person spends their whole entire life, once again, trying to prove their worth, which leads them to disconnect in their core values, which leads them into the wrong love-hate relationships, the wrong occupations, maybe a sense of emptiness, which leads them to maladaptive behavior, which leads them poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, which leads them, in our case here, to excessive body fat. So obviously, there's the etiology tree. I'll be happy to give you guys the graphic. And it's difficult to make all these changes. That's why I said in the beginning it's super tough. But for lasting change, from my observation, having done this already for 17 years, it really needs to be approached from some type of comprehensive, holistic structure of this sort. Is this the best model? I'm not going to say it's the best model. It's the best model I know of, and I've seen great success with it. But it would need to be approached this way. And we need to, I feel, especially as healthcare providers, although the financial incentive is definitely there, we just need to, for the patient's sake and for practicing ethically, we need to educate the client on all these variables and then leave it up to them to decide whether they want to change or not. And stop just with these, 2-minute assessments and then here's a bunch of drugs, or get into this boot camp class with 20 or 30 people and good luck, because it's not fair to the person, because I know I see myself in a lot of people as well, and I care for them, and it hurts me to see that they're accepting that type of healthcare practice as acceptable. So that's my presentation for today. I'll be happy to answer any of your guys' questions.